I know they got some, but they're bouncing people around. There's such a shortage of subs. Tough gig. I mean, you know. Okay. First thing is first. So, do you want to hear the story very quickly? Yes. All right. So, I used to joke around all the time that this was Partridge Hall because it's Partridge Hall. And I said, oh, you're welcome to Partridge Hall and all that stuff. I would just say stuff like that. Well, former student of mine, his father ran the store, the manufacturing. I let that made street sign for all of Helena. And he, you know, had his dad make a sign that said Partridge Hall. And God gave it to me. It's kind of funny. And I sent it someplace. I don't even know. Well, a couple of the other students in the class, as a joke, that'd be pretty funny if they put it up. And so they said, well, what do we stick it with? They got 2 tubes of those liquid nails. Have you ever seen that stuff? I mean, that stuff was like, they covered the back with it. Because they were just worried it would fall down. You know, they wanted to make sure it would last a little bit. And they stuck it up. That sign's not going anywhere. This whole city could be gone. There could be nuclear war, but that sign would still be there. And so that's how come Partridge Hall is up there. And so people say, why did you name it? Well, I said, because it's my hall. No, I actually had nothing to do with putting the sign up. And I actually tried to take it down. It's not coming down. So they repainted the hall. They had very carefully paint around that sign. It's going nowhere. So I know some of you want a souvenir. You can't be that. All right. So shall we talk about this? How are we doing these questions? Yeah, hopefully you have to go back and review. How about 4 out of 6? If you got 4 out of 6, you're okay. It's not 90, 80, 70, 60 percentages like they grade, like we grading here. The AP exam doesn't grade that way at all. You do 60% or better on your multiple choice, you've done well. They grade everything, come up with a score. They have a formula for all the multiple choice, short answer questions, essays. They have a formula. They come up with a score, then they divvy it up for the scores. So you miss 1 or 2, it's not a big deal. It really isn't. I know we'd all like to get 100%. But if you miss a few, it's not a big deal. And so our goal is over 60%. When I give you the practice test, you get 60%, you're in good shape. You do better than that, you're in really good shape. So let's look at this. Yeah, I thought some were kind of tricky. Had to remember, I did not like a couple of these questions. So here's the first one, just very quickly. Talk about the Paxton boys. They're also called the regulators. They're upset with all the restrictions, not of the colonies, but of Britain. And so that first one, the protest by the Paxton boys appeared during a period which many colonists objected to the British policies as the result of, the 7 Years' War. Talked a little bit about the war here, but 1764. Those are the events leading up to the American Revolution. The Treaty of Paris of 1763 has just been signed. The rest of these don't really make sense. The concern expressed in the excerpt helps explain why the British passed the. Now, this question's a little bit off. Because actually the Paxton boys are mad about this law, but which law was passed as a result of the new land the British got to? That proclamation. They wanted to end the fighting with American Indians who lived in that area because, frankly, the British didn't want any more conflict. They've just been fighting forever, but the Paxton boys wanted that land. Which of the following leaders from the earlier period represented a group in a similar situation? Which one is that? We didn't talk about him. John Smith mentioned very briefly in Jamestown. Roger Williams was Rhode Island, but that was a different reason. Yeah, it's Nathaniel Bacon. How do we do on that one? That one might have to trigger some memories, but also the great thing about going back here is like, oh, I need to go back over this again. And you'll notice almost all of this is in the review packet. That's why I'm making you go back through it. That's why I'm also rewarding you immensely. And I understand most of you are almost done with the review packet, aren't you? If you haven't started, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be very unhappy. Just tell them, most of you started some. If you do a few, then when we do the review sessions, we'll get a lot more done. It'll be a lot easier. If you try to put it off, which we've all done some procrastination like that probably, you will regret it down the road. I know it's easy for me to say, but I procrastinated too, I know. So let's get to this next one. Stamp Act Congress. Hopefully this triggered a memory about the Stamp Act. This was the direct tax that everyone paid on everything they made. Okay, I don't like question number 4. I don't know why anybody would ask a question like this, but we're just getting used to the wording, so whatever. The resolution of the Stamp Act Congress expressed respect for which person or group? That's a very narrow question, but it says that is the indispensable duty of these colonies to the best of sovereigns. Sovereign is king. But they kind of show respect to colonial merchants with the restriction of American commerce line. So it's just, that question makes no sense. Why would you ask that? Okay, for the first time, the Stamp Act placed a tax on the colonies. A tax that was every time you got a piece of paper, you had to pay money. That's a direct tax. A tariff or something like the Sugar Act, that increased the price for those supplying the goods. So they just bumped the price hike to the consumers. That's indirect. And that wasn't just a regulation of trade or support of church. Okay, which of the following was a direct British response to the colonial views expressed in the Stamp Act Congress? Okay, the Quartering Act, that was to enforce a taxation. I mean, I can see that, but that's not a very good answer. The Sugar Act taxing luxury items like sugar. That happened before. That's an indirect tax. That doesn't make sense. This one is a little bit vague. It's one of these two. Now, the Coercive Act, though, doesn't work. Even though it applies, that's from the Tea Act. That's almost a decade later. But if you put that down, at least you're thinking about a reaction to a tax, so that's not bad thing. I'm sure a couple of you probably put that down, your first answer. You're thinking about reaction to taxes. The Declaratory Act, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act and then turned around with this act and said, but we can still pass laws. So we're still in charge, so there. So that's where you get the township duties and things like that. 4 out of 6, I hope most people got. I looked at a few, some people got them all. Do you want to do some more? Yes! Pages 241 and 242, questions 1 through 6. This will be due on Tuesday. I totally forgot. I totally forgot something. You know what I forgot? We have class on Monday. So the DBQ will be on Wednesday. Totally forgot. All right, sound good? All right, so we're going to go fast now. Let's go. I have to go into detail about how Nazi Germany was started. Yay. And fascism, yay. And communism, yay. And everything, yay. I'm just yay. What? 241 to 242, questions 1 to 6. I literally, you know what I did? I literally just opened the book up and the first one I got. So I kind of want to bounce around. 241, 242. It's manifest testing. Manifest testing. It's good reviews to go back and kind of start picking out ones. And a lot, not everything, of course, but most of this is still in your head, I hope. In the scary, dark recesses of your mind. And just got to kind of bring them out again. That's what the review packet does, and that's also why I reward you so well. If you do want to. Same deal, use the other half sheet of paper you saved. Some of you seem to have like 30 or 40 half sheets of paper you've been saving for a rainy day. You leave me because of that? It's supposed to snow this weekend, man. So, you know, Helena got almost no snow, and like Jefferson City got like a foot. How much? Yeah, I said 32. No. Wow! And they kept school open. What's that? Boulder got that much?
Boulder got 40 inches.
Yeah, Glendock got almost 3 feet. So, talked to my parents in Miles City, they got it. And it just, I just went around that one. But we needed the snow. And I'm glad it snowed. I was also thinking about Monday. All right, I'm about to go shovel sidewalks. Nope, that's one thing I was happy about. All right, so did we get to, so we went through the issues of the Nazis and talked about, or what was the attempted coup called? Yeah, the beer hall putsch. Putsch just means coup. And it failed, but what would bring the Nazis to power? Could be anything. Yeah, the Great Depression. Oh, what was it called where prices went up dramatically because they couldn't collect taxes? What do we call that? Yeah, hyperinflation. And what is the idea for the desire for living space? Yeah, Lebensraum. And where was this land going to be? To the German point of view, east. And what ethnic group lived here? Which the obsession with race back then, it was, the great Slavic race. And who's their mortal enemy that have their own country now? The Soviets and the communists, their mortal enemy, but who's behind everything? Yeah, to appeal to business leaders and kind of middle class people, it was a fear of communism. They really just kind of thought that the talk about Jews fit in with just the typical anti-Semitism that was rampant all over the world. Not realizing that this was, they meant it, I guess is a good way to put it. So when the Depression hit, after that boom, kind of boom, it was unequal. The Depression was horrible. 32, did we get to this one, 32? So 32, the Nazi Party would become the largest party in Germany. No, not even close to the majority, but the largest party. And so I didn't show you this graph. This one, on the computer screen, you can see the difference, but the lines are supposed to be purple and blue. They look exactly the same here, don't they? Here's unemployment. When the Depression began, unemployment went up. Nobody, there are hardly any Nazis. As unemployment went up, the Nazi party went up. What made the Nazis was the Depression. And that we have an answer. And yes, there was an economic boom, but it was very unfair. This was part of the reason why there was such a great fear in the United States, that it could go one of these two directions. And so here is a Nazi poster, just basically implying the Arbeiter are going to go back to work. And Hitler's bringing something new. Hitler over Germany, implying he's flying from place to place. And in 1932, much like the United States did, the government cut back spending directly. They went to austerity, and the Depression became worse. They call him the Iron Tranter. Walter Bruning was kind of this apparatchik in charge. He would become kind of the villain, and he was very, you would say, closest thing to America would be like trickle down. That was his point of view. We got to save, cut spending, but Hitler took great advantage of this. These are unemployed workers lined up in Berlin. And the Communist and Socialist Party also grew. In fact, if they weren't so disunified, if they could have unified the Social Democrats and the Communist Party, these are two of the communist posters, they almost could have formed a government. But they hated each other so much, the communists and the socialists. Yes, they have a similar point of view, but all kinds of reasons, right? Going to German politics. But then here's a ballot from 1932. And look at all the parties. They had proportional representation in the Reichstag. And so that's one of the reasons why there's going to be this block of center parties that will form a coalition, but they feel threatened from the ultra-right, the Nazis, and then the socialists and the communists. This ballot, they voted for the communists. I thought that was kind of cool. A lot of these ballots are preserved. And in 32, there were two elections. In 32. And the first election, the National Socialists were the biggest party, but they couldn't form a coalition. So these middle parties formed a coalition, but it was really shaky. In December, there was another election. And the National Socialists lost votes. And the communists, the socialists and the communists gained votes. So the National Socialists actually lost power, But this panicked the conservative parties in the middle. And the fear of communism and the fear in this middle class that was benefiting from the capitalist kind of boom of the late 1920s, their fear of them, they went to the Nazis and said, let's form a coalition against the communists and the socialists. And so they got Hitler as a chancellor in this coalition. Chancellor is the equivalent of prime minister. The head of state is technically outside the government, but is elected by the people. So they elect a president, and they're the ones who call elections or call for a new chancellor. And the president was Field Marshal Hindenburg, who was in his 80s by then, the commander of the German armies in World War I. And he didn't like Hitler, called him a Bohemian corporal. Yes, very elitist officer. But to keep the communists out, here's Hitler. Now, Hitler was never elected. The chancellor does not have to be an elected member of their parliament. Britain, for example, the prime minister has to be an elected member of parliament. And then if their party has the majority, they become prime minister. It is just whoever's the leader of the party, and since this was the biggest party of the coalition, it's Hitler. But they thought they could control him. So here's this idea of Nazi theories, but he is chained by nice, safe, conservative checks. Don't think politically conservatives as in more like to control radical action. Don't think ideology. Well, they're wrong, obviously. But that's how Hitler took power. Purely constitutionally in the German Constitution. But the irony was, he took power constitutionally. Remember, a decade earlier, he tried to overthrow the government. He's using the tools and loopholes in the Constitution to destroy the government. Yes?
So, just to clarify, he was dropped that position because he, I think you said, leader of his party. What did you say?
They would, the Nazis were the biggest party in parliament, but they didn't have the majority. So the other parties went to them and said, let's form a coalition of parties. And that's the way it is now. Germany, there's no party in Germany to this day that has a majority. So they have a coalition government now with the leading party is a social democrat, just elected a couple months ago. And so there's a torchlight procession through Berlin, and using a long exposure time to make it look like lines through the Brandenburg Gate or Brandenburg Tor. And the Nazis would be infamous for torchlight processions. And that's why anything with the torchlight procession, I feel very, it makes me very uncomfortable. And I immediately do not like that. But, so if it happens here or anyplace else, because I know this history. And then, a month and a half later, the Reichstag caught fire. And they would find in the basement a babbling, mostly naked Dutch from the Netherlands, Dutch communist named Marius van der Lubbe, and he had gas and like gas-soaked rags, and he was arrested for this, and he was a communist. And the Nazis would use this as an excuse, using a loophole in the Constitution, the Weimar Constitution, for the chancellor to declare a state of emergency so they can operate like a dictator until the emergency is over. And what was his first move? He banned the socialists and the communists. Immediately kicked them out. We don't know to this day who caused this fire. Don't know. He very well could have been involved, but one person setting fire in this massive building seems a little bit difficult. But a lot of people believe that it was the Nazis themselves as an excuse to take power. Maybe. We don't have evidence of that either. I can't believe that there wouldn't be evidence because people around Hitler would have said it immediately because they would brag about it. And so that what makes me think it might have been him and a few, as it turned out, kind of dumb people. But how could a Dutch, someone from the Netherlands, come to Germany and do this? But the Nazis took advantage. They banned the parties, the opposition parties, and then meeting in the Opera House where they would meet until 1945, the now rump Reichstag would pass the Enabling Act, which extended the state of emergency thus making Hitler a dictator until Hitler decided the state of emergency was over. And when would Hitler decide the state of emergency was over? April 30th, 1945. At least he decided it was over because that's when he killed himself in his bunker. The war would end May 7th. And so with that, all constitutional. And Hindenburg signed it because of his hatred of the socialists, and he would die a year later. And they never left the position of president fill. And what did he do? Banned all opposition parties. Step by step, banned them all. And then arrested any radicals. The educated elite, so a number of teachers and professors would be arrested. Every labor union leader would be arrested and thrown into jail. All of them. And we're not thrown into jail, they put him in protective custody. Almost immediately after he became dictator, the first of the concentration camps would open. Remember I talked about a totalitarian state using terror. Well, this is terror. These would be prisons of absolute hell. There was an old munitions factory outside of Munich at a little tiny town called Dachau. So that would be the first concentration camp. Eventually there'd be over 3,000 concentration camps. Almost all of them would be a combination of torture, basically torture facilities where they would torture the people in there, and slave labor camps. So this is Dachau right here, and they built they filled up this little factory, and then they built horse stables, and that's where they put the inmates. Dachau were all men. So this is a color photo of all men. That's all was in Dachau. All political prisoners. And, this is Buchenwald, but another concentration camp. Now, to be very clear about something, these are concentration camps. These are prisons. And a lot of times, to be protective custody, yes, people would go in and then get out and tell everybody how horrific it was. Sometimes they'd be there for the rest of their life. And yes, thousands died there. These were not the death camps. The death camps that would be established during the war would be in 1942, almost all in Poland. And those were made on the same model, but specifically designed to kill people. Concentration camps were horrific prisons / slave labor camps. There's a difference. Same people ran them, but different. And so this is a picture I took of Dachau. This is part of the memorial. So many inmates, to get away from the hell, would throw themselves into the electrified fence. And that's what this represents, rather than go through the hell of these camps. And this is the gate. So I remember walking and taking this picture. This is the gate going in. Anybody know what this says? Yeah. Yeah, which is just mocking the whole thing, isn't it? Work makes you free. They had the same thing at the death camps too. They put that in every concentration camp, implying you could work your way out. No, and since laws didn't really matter, it could be for any reason. And originally, Hitler's kind of militia would be a group called the SA. They wore brown shirts. They found a bunch of uniforms that were going to go to colonial Germany and Africa. So they all wore brown. That's why Hitler kind of wore the dark tan. These were his private militia, Nazi militia, but Hitler never really had control. They were called the Sports Battalion, but eventually they called them the Assault Division. Sometimes you see them called Stormtroopers. And that was taking the name from World War I veterans. And these brown shirts were his private guard, and Ernst Röhm right here was the leader. But Hitler would have all the leaders killed in 1934, all of them. Made up a charge. Why? Get rid of every potential enemy. Stalin would do the same thing. These were all the Nazis that put him in power, and then he had them killed. But the one unit that was created that Hitler had more direct control was the Special Detachment, or the Sturmer, the SS. And originally this was going to be like this Aryan elite private guard for Hitler, and they all had to be over 6 feet tall. At first, blonde hair, blue eye, but eventually at least blue eye or blonde hair, one of the two. And it was going to be like this perfect Aryan unit. As the war went on, they started just drafting people, so it was about anybody. But these were the groups. By the way, this is goose stepping right here. You're seeing goose stepping? It's kind of an ornamental mark like that. A lot of armies did goose stepping. A lot did. But Germany became infamous for that. And that is where we lead to Nazi Barbie. Yes, I have Nazi Barbie. This is the Barbie, yes. I mean,
You showed us yesterday, you didn't show us.
I showed you guys, but that's where it came from. Let me show you one thing. I didn't show them, did I?
No, they were, I know people in both those classes and they were upset about it.
Isn't that kind of creepy? You want to see Nazi Barbie one more time? Okay, Nazi Barbie broke in half. It was a catastrophe. Wow, she lied. I don't like Nazis. Okay, especially Illinois Nazis. Okay, let's go back. And the leader of the SS was Heinrich Himmler. And we don't have time. It's not the context to go through a lot of the Nazi leaders, but Himmler would be the most infamous, this horrible toady of a man. Was kind of indoctrinated in this German racial superiority as a youth. And he'd be the responsible, the SS would be the concentration, the death camp guards. There would also be SS soldiers called Waffen-SS, and they would be the most fanatical as the war went on, horribly led, but would fight to the death. And they would get the best equipment over the German army, and really kind of a messed up system the Germans had, but Heinrich Himmler would become the symbol, and he would eventually become the head out at first was Goering, but of the secret police, the Gestapo. So here's a secret policeman. Now he's in uniform, but I just thought this was a pretty good picture because one of the symbols would be the German Shepherd, like everywhere. And that's just a regular Berlin police officer. And traffic cops in Berlin still have that uniform, so it's kind of funny. It seems so anachronistic and old, but they look like 1890s. This is the SS headquarters in Berlin, where political prisoners would be rounded up, and the torture facilities were in the basement. Thousands would be executed there. And by the way, when they tortured somebody, they didn't want the truth. You don't torture somebody for the truth. You torture somebody for what? Well, first off, torture. And what's the other thing? Yeah, names. You want confessions. This is what you're going to say. And they beat you till you say it. And it always works. It always works. That's why torture is banned under the UN Charter, for example, as a crime against humanity. So, I'll come back to that a little bit later on. This was totally destroyed in Allied bombing in March of '45. And so all that would remain is the basement, the cellars, where they had the torture facilities. And that's still there today. And that is a museum. It's called the Topography of Terror, which basically means the center of the terror. And it's one of the best museums I went to in Berlin. And it doesn't look like, it's just this beat up old basement. Just like this, it doesn't have a roof anymore, so it's just like a shell of it. And wow, they did a great job. Really get an idea. It's one of the things, if you get a chance to go to Berlin, go to that. So, anyone been to Berlin? We should go there. Want to go? We'll hop on the yellow school bus and take off. But, despite the beginnings of a police state, the first thing Hitler did is build like mad. They built bridges and roads and buildings. They had construction battalions that would march around like soldiers with shovels on their shoulders. It's funny and not funny at the same time. I don't know the whole idea of that, but this kind of militaristic, total war mobilization to rebuild the country. So here's the Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin, and it survived the war. You can go visit it today. It's an art school because they made Nazi architecture was all big, ugly granite buildings. They survived. It's like a bomb shelter. And of course, the Autobahn would be built. And all freeways would copy this. And what economic policy would this kind of copy? Would it be trickle down or Keynesian? Yeah, this is kind of Keynesian. Oh yeah, the whole thing was run by monopolies. a big cartels of businessmen got richer than you can possibly imagine. So it wasn't fully Keynesian, but it was spend, spend, spend. And what happened to unemployment? Almost zero. By 36, the German economy appeared to be booming again, coming out of the shadows of Versailles. And here's Hitler and a little repeatedly going back along the same road, along the Autobahn. Hitler would become probably the most popular leader Germany had ever or will ever have. Hindsight, though, but don't forget, the most popular leader in let's throw a country out there, Russia. Anybody know the most popular leader according to polls today? Stalin. Russia was, Soviets were strong. The second most popular leader was Ivan the Terrible in Russia. So that's not uncommon, is my point. Now, there's a shot, so he's incredibly popular. This is 1937. Here's another picture of a similar stretch of the Autobahn. Slightly different. Does anybody know what's going on there? This is April 1945. Who's this? German prisoners of war being led back to the West on that very same Autobahn. And these are U.S. tanks. That's a U.S. Sherman tank advancing, finishing Germany off. So, popularity would end in that. He'd also make a people's car, that all Germans could afford this nice car. The idea was he was going to raise the standard of living for most Germans, thus making him very popular. And you could save money, you get a little stamp book, and you buy stamps, you get enough stamps, you get this wonderful car. What would this car be called? It's for all of the people, so it's going to be what? Yeah, the people's car, or Volkswagen. That's where Volkswagen came from. And yes, Hitler personally did approve this model. If you ever seen a Volkswagen Beetle? That was going to be the people's car. The war got in the way. But after the war, they still had the molds to make this car. So they started producing this in the brand new country of West Germany. They needed exports, and it became kind of a niche, popular car all over Japan, Western Europe, but really the United States, the Volkswagen Beetle. So they would make Hitler's car until 1974, and they still make it in Mexico and Brazil. Almost the exact model. Where's the engine? Yeah, the engine's in the back. Because if that would be more efficient, more fuel efficient, the trunk's here. You ever drive one that's really weird because you're used to the engine in the front? And the other thing is if you get in a collision, head to head, yeah, Volkswagen Beetles, it's kind of like an Accord. So they're kind of dangerous. Be very careful in a Volkswagen. But propaganda was everywhere. Hitler's propaganda, and so much of the propaganda would be to indoctrinate the youth to be ready for the next future. This is Hitler Youth. And you notice generic Aryan boy, but who's looming behind Hitler? Boys and girls. And the Nazi Party, even though it didn't have majority membership, more and more people joined it. Hey, if you want to get ahead in this Germany, you join the Nazi Party. My job, for example, if I wouldn't have been put in a concentration camp and somehow survived, I would have had to join the Nazi Party. So all teachers had to be confirmed ideological Nazis, only teaching the approved courses from Hitler. Yeah.
So I understand that you want to look at Aryan and become real compromise. Did ever bug him that he did not have to conquer otherwise?
He had kind of greenish blonde, but he had dark hair. Well, they measured the face of a perfect Aryan. They did science.
Yeah.
And they measured the face, the bridge of the nose, and that face of the perfect Aryan just happened to match Hitler's face. Yeah, that's science. That's to give you an example how the Nazis were intensely anti-science. And once again, thankfully. But propaganda against Jews went up and up every single year. Here's some horrific, the scourge of the Jews. This caricature would be all over. It's a caricature from the Nazi magazine called Der Sturmer. In fact, the head of this would be executed for war crimes after the war. And in 1934, the first law to restrict now the relatively small population of Jews, but still, 1.5% of the population is massive. The Nuremberg Laws restricted the rights of Jews. These are brown shirts in front of a Jewish-owned store, intimidating people from coming in. They would stand there and yell and scream and break stuff. Here they are beating or putting up banners around the Jewish-owned store. And the whole goal was to limit the civil rights of Jews, try to ban marriage between Jews and non-Jews. They set limits of what Jews were, kind of measured it all out. How it had to be from your mother's side, and how many, if you claim to not be a Jew, but if your grandmother was a Jew, you're a Jew according to this. The whole goal was to make Jews leave. And by 38, about half of German Jews left. About half of them. But where did they go? And in 36, there was the Olympics. And I thought that was a very clever little poster. The Germans did very well in the Olympics. Most Americans remember one athlete who did very well, won 3 gold medals. Anybody know who? Have you heard of Jesse Owens? But this was a little bit problematic for the United States because Jesse Owens was an African American, and there's still Jim Crow laws, and in his home state he could not vote. And so the United States kind of pushed it, but kind of not. It's like one of those things like, yeah, see, your racial superiority arguments don't match, but we have our own problems here, so we don't want to talk too much about it. And then, let's get to the road to World War II. And we're going to go really fast now. Are we ready? So, oh, this is going into Poland. These are German troops. That's a symbol of Poland. So let's do it. Here we go. 31. We saw this in the video, so we're going to go pretty fast on this. Gathering strong. So this is just review. 31. The military had basically taken over the army. The Depression ended the democracy in Japan, just like it did in Germany. The army slowly but surely, and the army on their own, no orders from Tokyo, took Manchuria and created a puppet state called Manchukuo. And this is applying taking a piece of China, even though technically it was independent. China was in the middle of a civil war, but the League of Nations did nothing, partially because of the Depression, partially because the U.S. isn't involved. So that's the first step. Nothing happened. Oh. And then in 35 and 36, who invaded Ethiopia? Italy. This was a horrible fight. And yeah, like the Italian troops, and when the first thing they did is stuck up a picture of Mussolini. That's what fascist dictators did. The Italian army did not do very well. But the Ethiopian army was poorly trained, ill-equipped. The Italians used mustard gas. And once again, the League did nothing. Here is the reference to poison gas. This was Britain and France scolding Mussolini, but nothing happened. And then don't forget the Spanish Civil War. The Republicans, representing a democratic republic, but they also included in everything from kind of liberals to communists. They fought against the nationalists, the fascists under Franco. Nationalists, they were fascists under Franco. So, and by the way, this is review, so we'll go pretty fast over those. Nationalists are fascists under Franco, but who do the Germans and Italians help? The Republicans or the nationalists? Well, they're fascists, so it's a pretty good bet who they help, right? These are actually, they call them the Condor Legion, but new German planes. These are called die bombers. Literally, die bomber means Stuka. And they have this diagonal cross to kind of imply, no, they volunteered to fight for the Republicans. These are Italian planes. These are Italian soldiers there. And the fascist one. We know that already. And here's Germany, feeling as though they're surrounded. And let's get to the next big thing, the Rhineland. March of 36. The Treaty of Versailles said it could not be militarized. But Hitler announced he's going to send in his soldiers. And he was really worried. If Britain and France did anything, his generals were told to turn and run away. And this also should show you the state of the German military. This is 36. 3 years from World War II beginning, almost all of them were still marching or on horseback. They were not at all ready. The French had a modern, well-equipped, well-trained military of over 2 million men. The Germans had less than 200,000. Okay, the French army was really, really poorly led, but that's another story. But what did Britain and France do? Nothing. This might have been the moment, but Hitler could triumphantly enter the Rhineland, say this is all part of Germany, and that is the classic example of appeasement, giving in to aggression. Hitler, realizing they're not going to stop him, openly announced conscription and said they're going to have an army of over 1 million men by 39. Now still, the army is small. They're pushing against it, but that meant they're starting to rearm, and thus these poor soldiers goose stepping. It's really hard to goose step. Let me ask Barbie, she broke in half. And Watch on the Rhine, which actually was a popular song in Ethiopia, but now the Germans are there back on the Rhine, looking over at France. After that would be created the Axis powers. It was called the Rome and Berlin Axis, 36. It was anti-communist. But a few years later, Japan entered it. Then it became the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo Axis, and that's where we get the Axis powers. Japan, Italy, and Germany. And it was anti-Soviet Union. And you would see a little bit of complacency in the West, Britain, France, and the United States. Okay, we're terrified of Hitler now. He seems to be stronger than we are, even though he wasn't. But he's still mad at the Soviets, and we don't like Stalin either. And then in 1938, they occupied Austria. Unified this. This was explicitly denied in the Treaty of Versailles. And here is, remember that Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer? Here's Germany and Austria. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. We're all together. That is why today Austria is neutral. So they never, for example, joined either of the two military alliances of the Cold War, NATO or the Warsaw Pact. And to this day, they still consider themselves neutral. Basically, we're not going to be sucked in again. So now Austria. What did the League of Nations do? Nothing. And then the Sudetenland. There were ethnic Germans in this area in black right here, Czechoslovakia. Hitler said they're being horribly mistreated. Were they? Well, they were the minority population. They only made up about 60% of this mountainous, beautiful mountainous region here. I love this is from a new news magazine called Time magazine, but I love how they have a map of Florida to give you an idea of the size of Czechoslovakia. And this is an example of, under the Nazi sun, the Sudeten Germans can break their chains. No, Czechoslovakia, though, was a liberal, democratic republic, like Britain, like the United States. And that's where we get the Munich Agreement. Hitler, Mussolini, Chamberlain of Britain, the Laudierre from France met. And basically, what did they tell Hitler? You get all the Sudetenland as long as Hitler agreed to do what? That's all he wanted. By the way, don't trust Hitler. Yeah, Laudierre got back to Paris after this, and he thought the people would be furious. And they met him like a conquering hero. We won't have war. They all remember World War I. Chamberlain was treated like a hero. Years later, people would look back at Chamberlain as the symbol of appeasement and allowing for Hitler to do this. That's not quite true. By the time Munich hit, it was probably too late. Mussolini was the interpreter. Just imagine him blustering and strutting around. And what happened in 39? Oh, who wasn't there? Don't forget. The Czechs weren't there, and the Soviets weren't there. He thought, I can't trust Britain and France. Part of the reason the Allies won World War I is because Germany was fighting a two-front war. Not now. Or Hitler was, maybe not now. I jumped the gun. What happened to the rest of Czechoslovakia? You remember? Oh, don't forget, Munich is going to, it doesn't work. Munich is going to equal appeasement. And after the war, people are going to use this, you gotta, usually as an excuse to go to war. You have to go to war or we'll have another Munich. This would be used as an excuse to go into Korea, go into Vietnam, the Gulf War in '91, to build the hydrogen bomb would be, we can't appease the enemy. Iraq, you see people talking about it today. But that leads to Kristallnacht, the last thing for today. Hitler knew they're going to war. And this is going to be the last gas to get rid of the enemy with it. A German diplomat was assassinated on the streets of France by a young college student who was Jewish in response to what's going on in Germany. Hitler would use that as an excuse to try to drive all the Jews out of Germany before war. He knew war was coming. He wanted war. And this is going to be called what we call a pogrom, which is it's government-sponsored attack. But it looks like it's supposed to be like regular people do it. And they broke so many shop windows, it's going to be called the Night of Broken Glass or Kristallnacht. And the whole goal was to force the remaining Jews to leave. This is the largest Jewish synagogue, the largest synagogue in Berlin that was burnt down by this mob. Now it is a memorial. Germany has a very complex relationship with their past, as most countries do with their very troublesome elements of their past. What happened to Jewish leaders? They were put into protective custody, meaning they were sent to what? Concentration camps. The problem was, about 300,000 of the remaining Jews fled. Where could they go? The United States would not let them in. Remember, the United States passed the National Origins Act back in 1924 and limited the number of Jewish immigrants. So just a few came. Where did most go? Anyone know? Now, what's going to happen? As a measure of total. All righty then, on that happy note, have a good weekend. We'll see you. Don't forget, you have the review packet. Please, if you have not started, get going on it. I want you to limit your pain. And it will help you immensely. You will feel so good about yourself when you're done. The feeling of accomplishment combined with the knowledge that will come. You'll be done, right? No. Have you got it started? Got it? Get it started.
Oh, I have.
See, yeah. John hasn't? Okay. Have I started?
No, I'm going to get started.
Get it started. No. Start a little. I know you have. We got it started?
Get going on.
Trying to find all my notes. I have it spread across like 3 different.
I know. And don't forget, for Jim basic stuff, that review book has a significant amount. Just for a quick review. It's kind of shocking how much stuff the review book has. It's not as complete, but it will trigger memories.
That's good.
Get going, though.